In February 2011, the body of 17-year-old Emily Harper was discovered in a secluded wooded area near Cedar Ridge High School in Cedar Ridge, Oregon. The investigation revealed a web of secrets and betrayal involving the school's baseball coach, Daniel Mercer, and his illicit relationship with Emily. Starting in late 2010, a series of events unfolded that would lead to heartbreak, obsession, and ultimately, murder. March 6, 2011. It was a cold, foggy morning in Cedar Ridge, Oregon. The town, typically quiet, was beginning its usual routine. The early mist hovered low over the ground as joggers took to their favorite wooded trails near Cedar Ridge High School. That day, one jogger made a horrifying discovery that would change everything. At approximately 7:30 a.m., the body of 17-year-old Emily Harper was found in a small grove hidden behind a cluster of oak trees. The scene was disturbingly quiet, except for the distant hum of morning traffic. Emily's lifeless form lay sprawled on the damp earth, her head slightly tilted, and her cheerleading uniform torn and stained with mud. The distinct marks on her neck showed she had been strangled, a chilling sign of violence. Detective Nora Langley, a seasoned investigator who had handled her share of violent crimes, was immediately called to the scene. Detective Langley had seen brutality before, but something about Emily's case struck a personal chord. Perhaps it was the stark contrast between the brutality of the act and the innocence of the girl. Or maybe it was the little details, a broken silver necklace clinging to her neck, a smudge of red lipstick on the sleeve of her uniform, and a crumpled piece of paper in her clenched fist. The grove itself bore the marks of a struggle. A patch of disturbed soil, scattered leaves, and a single faint footprint partially pressed into the mud painted a picture of Emily's last moments, a desperate fight for survival. Langley observed everything with methodical precision, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She was quick to note that the crime felt deeply personal. Strangulation, in her experience, was rarely the choice of a detached attacker. This was emotional. Whoever had done this had known Emily, possibly even cared about her in some twisted way. The body was carefully examined on site before being transported for an autopsy. Langley remained behind, combing through the grove with her team, searching for any small clue that could lead them to answers. It didn't take long for her to feel the weight of the case pressing down on her. Cedar Ridge was a small town where everyone knew everyone. A murder like this wasn't just shocking, it was unheard of. March 8th, 2 days after Emily's body was discovered, the investigation took a sharp turn. Emily's best friend, Taylor Reed, came forward. She was pale, her voice barely steady as she explained what she knew. Emily had confided in her about a secret relationship with Coach Daniel Mercer, the town's beloved baseball coach. Mercer, 33, was charismatic and admired. Married with a newborn daughter, he had a picture-perfect life, until now. Taylor's revelation stunned the investigators. To the outside world, Mercer was the epitome of respectability. But Taylor's account painted a different picture. A man who had used his position of power to charm a vulnerable girl. Taylor described how Emily had grown more withdrawn in the weeks leading up to her death, often staying late after cheer practice or skipping outings with friends. She suspected something was wrong, but didn't push Emily for details until it was too late. The detectives wasted no time in retrieving Emily's phone. A thorough analysis uncovered a string of text messages between her and Mercer. The exchanges were flirtatious, laced with the kind of reckless intimacy that hinted at a relationship far beyond what was appropriate. Mercer's name, once synonymous with mentorship and community pride, was now tied to suspicion and scandal. March 10th. By mid-morning, Mercer was brought in for questioning. He arrived at the Cedar Ridge Police Department wearing a crisp polo shirt and jeans, his face carefully composed. Mercer was cooperative, even charming at times, as he acknowledged the affair. He admitted it had been a mistake, a lapse in judgment, but swore he had no part in Emily's death. The questioning, however, quickly revealed cracks in his story. Mercer claimed he hadn't seen Emily in days, but his timeline didn't align with the phone records, which showed a text exchange between them late on the night of March 5th, just hours before Emily disappeared. His calm demeanor began to fray as the questions became more pointed. Detective Langley couldn't ignore the inconsistencies in Mercer's story. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of Emily's disappearance, Mercer claimed he was home with his wife, Rachel. But Rachel's account, when later questioned, lacked the conviction of someone telling the truth. She hesitated, struggled to recall specifics, and seemed almost defensive when asked about her husband's late-night activities. Rachel Mercer's involvement, however indirect, added another layer of complexity. As the mother of a newborn, she appeared exhausted and emotionally strained. Her answers were inconsistent, not enough to indict her, but enough to make Langley wonder if Rachel was protecting her husband out of fear, loyalty, or perhaps something else entirely. The evidence against Mercer wasn't damning, but it was enough to make him the prime suspect. The text messages, the shaky alibi, and his role in Emily's life all pointed to a relationship that had spiraled out of control. But Detective Langley couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Hidden motives and untold truths lurking just beneath the surface. As the investigation unfolded, one thing was clear. Emily Harper's death wasn't a random act of violence. It was the result of tangled emotions, dark secrets, and a dangerous power dynamic. And Langley, relentless in her pursuit of justice, was determined to uncover the full truth, no matter how shocking it might be. The story rewinds to late 2010, to the quiet corridors and bustling sports fields of Cedar Ridge High School, where the paths of 3 lives crossed in ways that would lead to tragedy. Emily Harper was the kind of girl everyone noticed, yet few truly knew. At 17, she was bright, ambitious, and dedicated to her role as a cheerleader, often spending long hours perfecting routines or helping organize events. But beneath her polished exterior lay a heart burdened with pain. Her parents' divorce the year prior had left her shaken. Emily had always idolized the idea of a happy family, and watching hers fall apart shattered her sense of stability. Her mother's new relationship with a distant, unkind man only deepened her longing for someone who could provide the care and attention she felt she had lost. When Emily joined the school's cheerleading squad at the beginning of her senior year, she found herself drawn to the commanding presence of Daniel Mercer, the school's baseball coach. Mercer, at 33, was charismatic and well-liked. His reputation as a mentor extended beyond the baseball diamond. He was known for giving advice to students, listening to their problems, and offering words of encouragement. But what seemed like genuine kindness masked a more selfish need, a craving for validation and control. Daniel Mercer wasn't always the town's admired baseball coach. A decade earlier, he had been a promising minor league baseball player, celebrated for his talent and drive. But an unexpected injury cut his career short, forcing him to let go of dreams he had pursued since childhood. Returning to Cedar Ridge with nothing but dashed hopes and a fading reputation, Daniel turned to coaching, trying to rebuild his life through the successes of his players. Yet deep inside, he was restless. His job no longer brought him the excitement or recognition he craved. His marriage, though outwardly happy, was strained. Rachel Mercer, Daniel's wife, had once been the light of his life, They met during his minor league days when he was riding high on dreams of stardom, and she was a young medical student swept up in the charm of his ambition. But by late 2010, their relationship had shifted. Rachel, now a new mother to their daughter Lily, was battling postpartum depression, a storm of emotions she struggled to articulate. Her days were consumed by endless feedings, sleepless nights, and a growing sense of isolation. Daniel, instead of stepping in to support her, often seemed to retreat. His late-night meetings and weekend practices left her feeling abandoned, and she began to sense the widening gap between them. It was during this turbulent time that Emily and Daniel's paths became entangled. What started as casual conversations after cheerleading practices soon evolved into something darker. Emily saw Daniel as a stable presence, someone who seemed to understand her loneliness and need for affirmation. Daniel, in turn, saw Emily as an escape, a bright, admiring young woman who made him feel important and wanted again. By early 2011, their relationship had turned physical. The secrecy of their encounters added a dangerous thrill that blinded both of them to the consequences. Emily confided in no one except her closest friend, Taylor Reed, hinting at a forbidden romance that filled her with equal parts excitement and dread. February 20th, 2011. The illusion of their affair shattered on a rainy evening in late February. Emily, with trembling hands and a pounding heart, confronted Daniel with news that would change everything. She was pregnant. The weight of her revelation hit him like a freight train. The same man who had once whispered reassurances to her now looked cornered and desperate. Emily's pregnancy was the ultimate betrayal of their secret. For her, it was a cry for responsibility, a plea for Daniel to validate the love she believed they shared. For him, it was a threat to his carefully constructed life. The fear of exposure, the destruction of his career, his marriage, and his reputation consumed him. He begged her to keep quiet, promising to handle everything, though he had no idea how. Emily left their meeting with tears in her eyes, torn between hope and despair. She wanted to believe Daniel would protect her, that he would somehow make things right. But as days passed, and his promises grew vague and distant, doubt crept in. Rachel Mercer's life had felt off balance for months, but she had told herself it was because of the baby. Caring for their infant daughter, Lily, had consumed her, leaving her too exhausted to question the subtle changes in her husband's behavior. Late nights at practice, a growing distance between them, and Daniel's distracted presence at home were all brushed aside as the natural strain of parenthood. But on the night of March 1st, 2011, everything changed. It started when Rachel climbed into Daniel's car to move it from the driveway. She rarely touched the SUV, as it was the vehicle Daniel primarily used for work. As she reached for the glove compartment to retrieve a parking pass, her hand brushed against something unexpected, a sleek, unfamiliar phone. For a moment, Rachel froze, her breath catching in her throat. Curiosity turned to dread as she pulled out the burner phone. She stared at it, her heart racing, her mind grasping for an explanation. What was this phone doing in her husband's car? Why had he never mentioned it? Her fingers trembled as she unlocked the screen and scrolled through the messages. Each text she read felt like a knife plunging deeper into her chest. They were intimate, personal, and undeniable. Rachel's worst fears materialized with each word exchanged between Daniel and Emily Harper. The name alone struck a chord. She remembered Emily, a cheerful, pretty girl from Cedar Ridge High School's cheerleading squad. Rachel had seen her at school events, laughing with friends and cheering on Daniel's baseball team. She had even thought Emily was a sweet, innocent girl. But now, as she read message after message, filled with longing and flirtation. The image of that girl twisted into something sinister. It wasn't just an affair. It was a betrayal that cut Rachel to the core. She felt blindsided, humiliated, and deeply wounded. The texts revealed more than just infidelity. They showed a connection between her husband and this teenager that made Rachel feel small, invisible, and discarded. For hours that night, Rachel sat in the car, her grip tightening on the phone as her emotions spiraled. Memories of Daniel's recent behavior flooded her mind. The unexplained absences, the late-night texts he claimed were from staff issues, and the scent of a floral perfume she didn't own. She realized she had been ignoring the signs for months, clinging to the hope that their marriage was simply going through a rough patch. But this phone confirmed what she had refused to admit. Daniel was no longer hers. Rachel's pain soon morphed into anger. Questions raced through her mind, each one more venomous than the last. Why Emily? Why a student? What had she done to deserve this humiliation? She thought back to their early days together, the promises, the laughter, the dreams they had built side by side. How could he throw it all away? Despite the storm of emotions, Rachel didn't storm into the house to confront Daniel. That night, she held back, her anger simmering beneath the surface. She wasn't ready for the confrontation yet, not when the depth of her rage felt so uncontrollable. Instead, she kept the phone, turning it over and over in her hands, as if the weight of the object could anchor her to reality. Rachel spent the rest of the night piecing together the events of the past few months. She remembered how Daniel's coaching meetings seemed to grow more frequent as fall turned into winter. There were the late-night calls where he'd leave the room, speaking in hushed tones. There were the small lies she had brushed off because she didn't want to seem paranoid or insecure. And there were the moments she had caught him staring at nothing, lost in thought as if something, or someone, had consumed him. Every moment of denial she had clung to now felt like a betrayal of herself. How had she let this happen? She had been so focused on being a good wife and mother, on keeping their family intact, that she hadn't seen the cracks forming in their foundation. By dawn, Rachel knew that confronting Daniel was inevitable. But she also knew she couldn't do it in anger. She needed to think, to plan, to regain control of a life that suddenly felt chaotic and broken. The betrayal had shattered her trust, but it hadn't broken her resolve. If Daniel thought he could keep this secret, if he believed there wouldn't be consequences, he didn't know Rachel as well as he thought he did. That morning, Rachel walked back into the house, her face calm, but her mind racing. She placed the burner phone in a drawer, its screen dark, as though it held the secrets of a world she was no longer part of. For Rachel, the phone wasn't just evidence of Daniel's affair. It was a symbol of the life she had lost and the battle she was preparing to fight. March 5th. It was a chilly Saturday night in Cedar Ridge, Oregon, and the town's high school parking lot was unusually quiet. Cheer practice had ended late that evening, with most of the girls heading home under the bright overhead lights. Emily Harper, however, lingered, her heart pounding as she waited for the familiar black SUV to pull into view. She had made up her mind. It was time to confront Daniel Mercer. Time for him to face the consequences of what they had done. Emily had spent the entire day rehearsing what she would say to him. The weight of her pregnancy had become too much to bear alone. She could no longer carry the secret of their affair in silence, and she refused to let him continue living his double life without accountability. She wanted answers, promises, and most importantly, action. The SUV arrived just as she had expected, its headlights casting long, eerie shadows across the asphalt. CCTV footage later showed Emily climbing into the passenger seat at 9:17 p.m. Her head down, her face tense. This would be the last time anyone would see her alive. 10 days after Emily's disappearance, the forensic team uncovered a crucial piece of evidence that linked Daniel Mercer to the crime. Fibers from Emily's cheerleading uniform were found embedded in the fabric of the passenger seat of his car. The SUV, which had been parked in the Mercer's driveway the morning after Emily went missing, was impounded for examination. The discovery was a breakthrough in the case. Forensic experts painstakingly reconstructed the timeline based on the evidence. Strands of Emily's blonde hair were found on the headrest, and faint smudges of mud on the floor mat matched the soil type from the wooded grove where her body was discovered. Investigators were certain Emily had been in Daniel's car the night of her murder. The evidence mounted against him, and on March 20th, 2011, police arrived at Daniel's home early in the morning. The once confident coach was pale and disheveled as he opened the door to officers holding an arrest warrant. Neighbors watched from their windows as Daniel was led away in handcuffs, his head lowered, the life he had so carefully curated now crumbling around him. Daniel maintained his innocence, claiming he had dropped Emily off at her house that night. But his story was riddled with inconsistencies, and the physical evidence spoke volumes. To Detective Nora Langley, it seemed clear. Daniel's affair with Emily, combined with her pregnancy, had pushed him to commit an unthinkable act to protect himself. As the investigation continued, another shocking revelation came to light. During the meticulous examination of the evidence, forensic experts found fingerprints on the murder weapon, a silk scarf used to strangle Emily. The prints did not belong to Daniel, but to his wife, Rachel Mercer. Rachel had been cooperative throughout the early stages of the investigation, answering questions with calm resolve. But when confronted with the forensic findings, her demeanor shifted. She became evasive, her answers growing shorter and less consistent. Detectives noticed her hands trembling when asked about the night of the March 5th. Pressed further, Rachel broke down. She admitted she had followed Daniel that night. Suspicious of his behavior and aware of the affair, she had taken her own car and parked some distance away from where Emily and Daniel met. She had watched them from the shadows, her emotions swinging wildly between heartbreak and rage. In her confession, Rachel described how she had waited until Daniel walked away, leaving Emily alone in the grove. It was then that she confronted the young girl, the overwhelming weight of betrayal and humiliation driving her actions. In a fit of rage, Rachel had grabbed the scarf from Emily's bag and strangled her in the heat of the moment. Her admission shocked the detectives, who had initially built their case entirely around Daniel. Rachel insisted that Daniel had no knowledge of her actions, that he was as blindsided by the murder as anyone else. But Rachel's confession didn't fully absolve Daniel. Detectives couldn't ignore the possibility that he might have deliberately left Emily vulnerable, knowing Rachel was following him. The revelation sent shockwaves through Cedar Ridge. The seemingly perfect Mercer family had been hiding a web of lies and dysfunction that no one could have imagined. Friends and neighbors who had once admired Rachel for her poise and grace were now faced with a woman whose jealousy and pain had turned deadly. September 2012. The trial of Rachel Mercer became a media sensation, drawing national attention. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman driven to murder by her husband's betrayal, but they also argued that Rachel had acted with intent. They emphasized her calculated decision to follow Daniel that night, her deliberate confrontation with Emily, and the fact that she had left the scene without calling for help. The defense, on the other hand, portrayed Rachel as a victim of emotional abuse. They argued that Daniel's manipulation of both Emily and Rachel had created a toxic environment, one that ultimately drove Rachel to snap. The defense highlighted her struggles with postpartum depression and the psychological toll of discovering her husband's affair. The courtroom was filled with tension as witnesses testified about Daniel's relationship with Emily, Rachel's behavior in the weeks leading up to the murder, and the tangled dynamics of the Mercer family. After weeks of testimony, the jury convicted Rachel of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Daniel, charged with conspiracy and obstruction of justice, received a 15-year sentence. Emily Harper's death left an indelible scar on Cedar Ridge. Her parents, still reeling from the loss of their daughter, struggled to understand how such a tragedy could have unfolded. The once close-knit community became a place of whispered rumors and lingering suspicion. A cautionary tale of how secrets and betrayal could destroy lives. Rachel's confession and the trial's revelations provided some closure,